So we have the two presiding officers, or I am acting tonight in presence, as well as Michelle Boyer and Councilors Tim Barrett, Matt Coda, and I think, and
Kate Bailey and Chelsea, our school members.
Thank you. Okay, all together. Very good. Good to see you, Kate and Chelsea. Thank you. Well, welcome. First thing we need to do is, of course, pledge allegiance to the flag. We do this for a reason, and it starts with us here at the local level. So we have a flag here on our deputy city manager's screen. And please, Andrew, will you? Please?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
All right. And now our city manager, since we are here in City Hall, she will give us instructions on how to exit the building in case of an emergency, as well as give us a review of the technology options for those who are attending online.
Thank you. So welcome to 180 Market Street. We'll have you all here. So we are on the 3rd floor. So if there is an emergency, go out this door or the doors behind us, and then find your way to the stairs, either the front or the back. There is a space of refuge at this back staircase down this hallway here. For those who are participating remotely, thank you for joining us. Thank you for having your cameras on. If you would like to talk, please feel free to unmute yourself and provide comment, or if you are interested, you can also indicate such in the chat, and the chair will call on you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jesse. So now we are to item 3, which is the agenda review. Are there any additions, deletions, or changes in order of agenda items? And this, of course, can come from any school board director or city councilor, or if our superintendent or city manager. Okay, very good. We will full bore ahead. Comments and questions from the public not related to the agenda is item number 4. We do have some members of the public here. Are there any questions or comments that anyone wishes to make? All right, very good. You're all here for the main event. So, which is number 5. We're going to have a discussion on the school impact fee report from Jonathan Flayson. Is he here, Jonathan?
He just joined.
Very good. Good to see you. Very good. And we also, of course, have our superintendent of schools, David Young, here. I think we're going to perhaps take a moment at the end of the meeting. Perhaps that's more appropriate, but I just wanted to say it's a real delight for me to see you in person. Since I missed your official going away party, I needed to be up in Essex for daughter's ballet class, and it's hard to clone myself and be at 2 places at once. So I'm really delighted you're here. And it's a real honor to be sitting at the table with you tonight. All right, Jonathan, please, if you will lead us, as well as David, you might have this all planned out.
Yeah, so let me just I'll kick this off. So Jonathan Slayson from RSG is with us, and the purpose of this agenda item is to give some reflection and feedback and kind of current findings that Jonathan has done on this impact fee assessment or study. And I think this was important, at least to my school board, the school board, to be able to discern where we are and to inform the city and seek any questions that the city may have as we move forward. Again, overall perspective from the district is that we have been seeing significant increases in growth. We have 2 schools that are significantly overpopulated currently, Rick Marcotte and Orchard. And as you know, many years ago, we had impact fees and we made a decision to turn them off or take that away. And so this particular discussion is whether or not we bring those back or not to help offset current growth related to enrollment, right? To help our schools be able to, in a fractional way, to help defer some of those enrollment costs that are a result of those additional students. So without further ado, happy to have Jonathan kind of walk you through, and want to leave, I think, a lot of time for school board members and city council and public to ask questions to Jonathan, really, around the efficacy and expectation and purpose of impact fees. So, welcome, Jonathan.
Yeah, sorry to be remote. I was under the impression to be remote tonight, so hopefully it will work out all right. We have the presentation that we've previously had, and we've tabled the PDF of the draft report. And I think, frankly, it'd be more effective. We're going to just verbally walk through what has happened to provide the history as well as where we might go. I believe that the last time I presented was last week at the school board meeting, and we went through the process. I think there was a lot of questions, particularly around the magnitude, and I absolutely think that where we'll spend most of our time today. So backing up to what David just discussed is that we're in a situation where the city had impact fees for schools for many years, and they sunset them. And now we're finding ourselves in a situation where we require additional capacity to meet the needs of enrollment today, as well as to meet the needs of future enrollment anticipated by the growth and development within the city of South Burlington. Impact fees, first off, are only a partial solution. We realize that bonding, property taxes, grants, these will supply
Jonathan, I'm gonna,
the
excuse me,
majority of any future funds for the capital needs of the district.
Jonathan, can you
Yes.
hear? Yeah, I think what would be easier, because this is the second time that your voice is
Yep.
broken up, could you possibly call us on the phone and we could have a cleaner audio?
Tell him to turn off his video. instead.
Or, okay, I do like that.
Yeah.
Or the video.
Well, I mean,
You can try to turn off the video to see if your voice comes through more clearly, but there's also the option to call in and have your video while you're actually using your speaker, your speakerphone. Do you have a preference?
Yeah, okay. I was curious. I was getting a little jumpy audio from you as well. I will call in and we'll go from there, because I was not going to screen share unless we needed to. So I'll be right back.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I think it will just be a smoother presentation. Very good. Well, I'm glad to see, Helen, that you're here.
Yeah, sorry, was a little late. I was having some technical issues as always.
We've become accustomed. That's part of the new normal.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it won't take too long. And thank you to all of our legislators for being here. It's very important for us to have this as well. the other day. Any news on the black bear of South Burlington? Has he moved on? I haven't seen any announcements of late on the public or Facebook pages.
My son captured video of it. It's pretty good. Yeah, he tracked it. It's pretty good with his car.
Was it recent?
No, like a week ago.
Hopefully he's then moved on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where was he?
It's in Cider Mill, where I live, right off of Dorset Street. Big one, yeah, big black bear. It was pretty neat.
Yeah, big one. Yeah. We were up in the Green Mountains over the past 10 or so days, and I thought I'll go for an early morning walk as I do here. And I saw a black bear who quickly you know, I think the verb that my dad uses for him, thundered off. He thundered off, and man, that was stopped my heart for a couple heartbeats. But yeah, they're magnificent though. They're magnificent.
More than just a couple heartbeats.
Yes, that was the last early morning walk I took in the Green Mountains. So, great. Jonathan will be back with us soon. There he is. Very good. And you can
Thank
hear
you.
us?
Apologies. I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, beautiful.
All right. I am so sorry. Well, where were we? We were introducing concept of impact fees generally and want to just set expectations, and that, as I mentioned, impact fees are only a supplemental source, and they also provide us a fair amount of latitude. There's a lot of legal requirements as to what they can legally fund, but we're in a situation where, as a complementary and supplemental funding source, there's a political reality that impact fees can adjust to. And the impact fees that were articulated in the draft report for your review represent a legal maximum. And I feel comfortable walking through that process with you if we want to go through the methodology to get to that maximum. But the process generally is that this study provides us the nexus and the legal rationale to relate anticipated land use development and growth to the additional capacity and capital infrastructure needs that has been identified. I'll pause there and simply reflect that the capital expenditures that has been articulated in this plan is one that I'm sure David can provide additional context, but Dor Whittier has been working for years with the school district and most recently concluded an investigation in the elementary schools after they spent other years working on the middle and high school investigation. And at this point in time, they identified up to 125,000 square feet of space that would be required to meet not only existing needs, there's a 52,000 square foot deficiency across the district, but 73,000 of square feet of new capacity to meet the needs to accommodate future enrollment. So the whole 125,000 square feet, in addition to the existing 446,000 of square feet that exists, that's really what we're looking to fund at a total cost of $325 million of capital costs, and 335, excuse me, at an average cost of $587 per square foot. We know that these costs have been inflated just over the last year, and we don't know exactly where they'll go over the future few years. But this gives us a sense of the magnitude that we're facing, and the impact fees are looking to basically address 20% of that total cost based on the amount of new capacity that would be available for future enrollment relative to today. David, do you want to talk a little bit more about the capital costs and the history and the genesis of those, or do we want to go into the calculation of the impact fee and the kind of the unit cost at a household basis?
Yeah, I think, Jonathan, it's probably most efficient with time-wise to go right on to questions. I don't think there's anybody in the room who isn't aware of, some of our capital work in the past, as well as our elementary deeper dive and study and enrollment forecasting that we've done over the last, 10, 15 years. So
yeah, okay.
I just want to be sensitive to people's time and the opportunity to ask questions.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I think then, obviously, the school board, we had a meeting one-on-one last week, and then the city council, I appreciate your time. And your review of this document, and I'm happy to answer any questions and walk through any of the document itself.
I have a question.
Yes, please, go ahead.
So Jonathan, you mentioned that we used to do impact fees and then we stopped doing them when enrollment went down. I'm wondering what those impact fees used to be compared to the impact fees we're talking about now in terms of the actual monetary amount.
The school board
Yeah.
director, Tilling asked.
Good question.
I don't know if anyone has that answer. I was trying to find it on Google previously when we kicked off this study, and I thought it was somewhere between maybe 2 to 7K per household unit. I honestly forget what the magnitude was, and it wasn't obvious because I forget what the last year of collection. It wasn't clear to me when the bylaw was sunset.
Well, do you have that?
I do, give me 1 minute.
Thanks, Paul.
So for those on Zoom, Paul Connor, our planning and zoning director for the city, has also joined us up there in the audience.
It's gonna take me a minute to find this, so,
Can I ask a question while Paul searches?
yes, as long as it's not
And if we
me.
could just, if we could state our name so that Jonathan knows who he's addressing.
Matt Goda, South Valley City Council. Traditionally, impact fees are paid by the developer when they pull their permit. Is that correct? Or is it paid by the individual homeowners when they take residence in the new home?
It would be typically paid for at that time of permit approval. Some communities do it at CO, certificate of occupancy, but most communities do it when the land use permit is applied for a building permit. And the impact fees would typically be designed to also be proportional, that if a homeowner were to add a bedroom to an existing unit, then that also, at the time of that building permit, there could be a fee imposed.
Please.
And of course, we have impact fees for commercial and industrial properties related to traffic, but the impact fees would just be homes or rental properties. Is that correct? For schools.
Yes, it would just be on the residential aspect for the school impact fees. Most other impact fees are attributed to all types of development, whether it's residential or non-residential.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yep.
I have a follow-on question. I didn't hear the response. Is it the developer or the homeowner?
So this is Michelle Boyer's question.
Sorry, I'm.
Yep. Yeah, the clarification is that whoever applies for the building permit would be paying the impact fee. And that can happen when there's multiple lot development happening, or it would be at a point where a individual building were to maybe go under some expansion.
So in other words, it could be both. So if I owned a quarter acre and I wanted to build my own, I would be the payer of the impact fee. But if a large developer came in and wanted to build 50 units and then sell the properties themselves rather than sell the lots, they would be paying the fee.
Right, so
That's right.
Typically, for new construction in South Burlington, it would be a developer who then goes to sell the building to a homeowner. Obviously, the cost then goes on to whoever's buying the house. Occasionally, but rarely in South Burlington, somebody just owns a lot and builds their own house on it as a individual. And then as Matt was saying, if somebody were to do an expansion to a house and that was something that was applicable under the ordinance, then that would be on whoever's doing the expansion to their house.
But either, Michelle Boyer again, either way, it's the homeowner that pays.
Well, ultimately, all
Ultimately.
costs associated with the construction or expansion of the house is going to the person who lives in the house. So whether it's, somebody pays for it and then that fee gets passed along, or it's them directly, ultimately, it's the owner or renter that is paid, that is all costs associated with the building.
Thank you. I think that's a really important clarification.
I have a question.
Yes, please, Tim Barrett, City Councilor.
when we retired our impact fees, or for anybody else knows, what was the money used for? Because it had to be something specific, right? That was a capital project, right?
Previously for the school
Yeah,
one?
yeah.
I'm gonna have to look that up. It was back in 2009. My recollection was that the projects that were listed and the school population, the projects that were listed were complete and the school population wasn't growing. And, you know, if the projects are complete, then there's no reason to be collecting an impact fee unless you've got new projects. And at the time, there was not a proposal saying, and here's our next capital project that would continue the fee. I don't recall the exact projects that had been under there.
Yeah, Orchard, Rick Marcotte and Chamberlain had what we call project rooms that were added in 1998, I believe. And that was because of significant growth impact at that time. So those project rooms were added at that time to give some additional space kind of in the congregate way. But again, the schools were smaller then too. So that was, a portion of that was used from the impact fee. Yeah.
Megan?
Yes, please, Helen, do you have?
I just had a question. So the legal requirement is that the school projects have to be under construction or being constructed during the time you're collecting the fees. You're not allowed to do any kind of proactive planning in the sense that our population grows at X amount, and this number of homes seem to get built each year, and the impact of schools at some point is going to be greater. Is that right?
What has to happen is that the identified project has to be on a capital investment program, but you're able to use those funds in the pre-planning and the project design phases of any of that. And that also allows some flexibility as to what the final look and feel of that capital investment looks like. In many instances, the final product is not exactly what was originally envisioned and what the impact fee was for. You have to legally fund the amount of capacity that you were looking for, but there's some flexibility as to, you don't have to be 100% certain at day one, because you can pay for the pre-design and the project planning.
So a school could decide to really plan ahead and have a capital planning document that's 10 years out about anticipated needs and plan it that way or not? I mean, does it have to be?
Yeah, what would have to happen? Paul will have to remind me. Sometimes the CIP has a 5+ year category, and that way it's put onto the CIP, but yet it's not within the first 4 years of a kind of a guaranteed funding window. And you can then start collecting fees immediately and pay for the project development as it becomes more clear and evolves. And the project could be put in that 5+ window for multiple years, as long as the impact fees are continuing to go toward that particular investment. Now, we would all be in trouble that if no school were eventually to be built. So it has to go toward that eventual funding. So there is some flexibility in terms of the collection and the expenditure to that, but it has to be listed. There has to be a political stated commitment that there is X amount of dollars of new capacity being added to the system.
And if a renovation provided added capacity, does that qualify? So I'm thinking of, science labs. Maybe the way they were originally designed don't allow 40 kids to work on the lab at the same time. But if you upgraded and, improve them, you might be able to, you could meet capacity.
Yeah, there's very specific rates from my experience in the past where the impact fee dollars could and could not go, right? There's very clearly delineated guidelines on what it can and what it can't do. And it all has to be predicated specifically on enrollment-based consequences or need, right? And so that, I'm not saying that Helen's example isn't exact, but it really needs to go back to what enrollment is doing and not allowing for students to be able to be served.
And this is state law, David?
Well, I think it's embedded in ordinance-related language that is kind of the legal language of the impact fee process, but I'm not, that's outside
Local.
the language piece, I'm not sure. I just know that impact fees, and Jonathan can speak to that on a more broad front around, I know you collect impact fees for other things in the city, and they have to be related to and collected on new developments and things like that. So it's not dissimilar, right? But similar to how you can't use money you're collecting for other areas to apply to different areas, right?
Like an impact fee for traffic mitigation, you can't spend it on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Paul Connor, our Director of Planning and Zoning.
Yeah, so a couple things, answers to prior questions in a second, but yes, David is correct that the state law, and correct me if I'm misstating this a little bit, Jonathan, but basically it can be used for increased capacity. How you measure increased capacity is there's some flexibility in what that is done, but ultimately it is only for capacity that does not exist today. If you're trying to bring our current residents up to a new level of service, that's not what impact fees can do. Correct?
Yeah, it comes down to service standards is the terminology. And that's where for the school system, we're using the Massachusetts-based standards, which gives us very clear guidance that suggests that we have a deficiency today and there's this expectation. I think to Helen's point, well taken, that you can do some of the internal configurations and create, in effect, more effective capacity, but we do need to hang our hat on those more legal standards of what defines that service standard.
So answer number 2, yes, John, our CIP is a 10-year CIP. So if that's eligible, we're typically looking 10 years out in our capital improvement plan. I would note that what you've reminded me in other projects is to be mindful not only of the commitment to build the project, but if impact fees are only a piece of the financial puzzle, by collecting the impact fees, you're essentially committing that the rest of those funds will also be found. And so if it's 10% of a project, you're collecting it to do it, then somewhere the remaining 90% will need to be obtained in order to, because the impact fee, you're only getting whatever percentage of it. So
And accounted for?
plan
That's
for it, I
something-
get, well, you tell me. I mean, ultimately, if they're going to be spent, John, is that correct?
Yeah, I think if I'm hearing the nuance of the question is that we need it on the CIP. We need to have accounting to say where the dollar is going. But to Paul's point, once we put it on the CIP, and as soon as we collect the first dollar attributed to that project, there is a legal expectation that the project will be delivered. And if the project is not delivered, then we have a liability of returning those fees.
Is it as complex as the TIF district, or are we speaking more if it's not done then?
If there's a fifth that I can plead on the 10th question.
Luckily, I don't think it's as complex as a TIF, but there's it's all part of the picture.
Is that for us to be granted something with VEPC, we have to show how our numbers will actually add up to what is needed to get our projects done, right? There has to be just not a wish list, but actually forecast numbers based on actual fact, right? Actual development fact. Is that something that we need to account for, that in fact the district is collecting the matching funds in order to use the 10% on a CIP project? And I see my city councilor, or city manager, sorry, Jesse Baker has perhaps something to say.
So I guess how I would answer that, I'd be curious Jonathan's response as well, is that there is not the same level of audit process that's involved with the TIF to justify that revenue, those revenue plans and revenue collection. I think the liability and what the council would need to consider if implementing such an ordinance is developers could come, if it wasn't implemented per the school CIP, developers would have a case back against the school and probably by extension the city, or the city and probably by extension the school, for collecting those fees without cause. So it's more of a legal liability, whereas TIF, it's more of a regulatory liability. Does that make sense?
It does. And it's
Yeah.
good for your distinction to be reaching our ears as well, that the city is in fact held liable if the project does not go forward, right?
The other thing that's
Yeah.
interesting, sorry, Jonathan.
No,
The
David,
other
go.
thing that's interesting to me is that, we're talking about impact fees. I recently, over the last couple of years, I received back 250 requests, permits, based on enrollment capacities at said school for this development. And currently, my answers are going to be no, I don't have capacity at Rick Marcotte, Orchard, or the high school. So that in and of itself, Act 250 permit by the school district, when asked, do you have capacity? I say no, right? And we typically haven't had that a lot, but as more and more developments happen, I think that's impact, or that is connected to impact fees as well, right? So again, the district at current needs to say no to high school, no to Orchard, and no to Rick Marcotte, because we don't have capacity. I don't know what that does in connection to the city comprehensive plan and projects that are planned or in the queue. But I think that's an important piece that's also connected to this conversation and impact fee on how we can continue to, evolve.
Yeah.
The last question that was asked was, what was the fee back in 2009? Back at that time, it was for single-family homes, a little over $2,800, and for multifamily, just about $1,600
Per unit?
per unit, yes. And that was,
That's the average because it changes based on bedroom size?
no, that was strictly single-family and multifamily.
That was the way it was
It was
established.
done by just the unit, not by bedrooms or anything like that. At that time. And the eligible projects, I'd have to dig deeper. There were improvements at various schools.
Thank you. Yes, Matt Coda.
Jonathan, you're at Mankato City Council. You're recommending by bedroom, or is that just a suggestion? I don't know if that's a formal recommendation.
Yeah, it's an attempt. I think the single family, multifamily approach that you just heard was an attempt also to recognize that different households generate different units of students. In an attempt to be more equitable and represent the fair share contribution or impact, it's very clear from the data that studio units or even one bedroom units really don't generate a lot of students at this point in time. And so if we were to put a fee on those units that may be perceived as unfair or too high for their level of burden on the system, the idea is that then that could be an equity impact, and we would be jeopardizing the affordability of some of our units. Now, the flip side of that is that 3-bedroom units, I live in a 3-bedroom house. I have 2 children. 3-bedroom units have more students typically living in them. And so the burden is higher. So if we do it on a per bedroom basis, you can see that distribution, and 3-bedroom plus units arguably are going to pay more if we do it in that manner. So we have a difficult conversation to say, is it a topic of fairness and equity, or is this something that do we want to average it out and try to find a value that works and treat everybody the same? So it's a political conversation, but it tries to reflect the data that larger units typically have more students living in them.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So I guess the question I have is for the school board and superintendent, how will the matching funds be collected? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but the answers to my questions indicate that we are in fact VEPSI, right? And we are hearing from you asking for a district with some tax, right, capacity. And we need to make sure that the numbers, you know, are there so that our liability, right, is, we're doing our due diligence here, our fiduciary duty, that we are liable, and we want to make sure that, you know, we can meet that expectation. What are your plans for collecting matching funds?
So this is actually my question as well, Michelle Boyer, School Board.
Yes.
Being new on the scene, it's a fundamental question. How are we going to meet the, by my computation, 260 million after the impact fees, which represent 20%.
Mhm.
Well, I'm interested to hear the proposals on the table for that.
Yeah, I'm not really sure, the computation amount, because I think that's in part of the conversation on what the desire would be for collection. You know, you've had a little bit of conversation just now about how that would happen. Clearly, I think people are well aware of kind of the current conditions of schools at present. Obviously, impact fees would have to go towards enrollment-related expenses. But as we move forward, it's pretty clear that we have some pretty significant expenses in the very near forecast, you know, not just in our community, but pretty much statewide. So I would see those funds going towards the mitigation of those current issues that are in play, whether it's PCBs or lead. And, you know, the legislature has been working hard to create some funding sources, but, you know, at $4.2 million, it's probably not going to be anywhere near enough for schools like Burlington High School, which was one school out of 400 schools. You know, the only school that actually tried to do something became identified as a problem and full stop. So the amount of money that, for instance, Burlington has had to spend, and again, this is specific to impact, but it is correlated to impact because you do have growth along with needs, right? And that would be how I would see it play out is the long-term master plan as you revitalize schools and make space for increased growth. I loop back to Act 250 with developments coming on, city planned. There's got to be a conversation around, do you have the space and capacity to deal with that? And as I said earlier, right now I'm saying we don't. So I don't want to get too far. I wouldn't want to get too far down the road when you start saying this development is planned to come on, but then it's going to get stopped up or early stopped up and say, we don't have capacity. So there's got to be an in-depth conversation around impacting growth, long-term need, future development, school wants and needs. So I feel like certainly whatever is figured or however this moves forward, there needs to be a logical collection of impact fees that can be sustained, you know, in the long term.
Do you envision the way that discussion could be had? Is that a visioning process with the full school board and city council, public meeting, of course, or a workshop of sorts? Clearly, these things cannot be fleshed out in the 2 hours that we have allotted
Yeah.
for this meeting.
No, I don't think that's I think what we recognize is that we're currently in a situation, and as you know, the city and the school over the last 15 years has been back and forth we had enrollment situation, elementary, there was then a push to go, we got to deal with the high school because that's more in need. That pushed the capital need, master planning and visioning. I would envision some pooling of those documents with a committee going forward to determine what we're going to need. We have already done a lot of due diligence around the high school, particularly, and the middle school. And that's what moved us forward with a capital campaign for the high school and the middle school. I would see that you would revitalize that exact plan, updated figures, updated ideas if need be, and move forward with that. And I think that's a pretty quick way to then ascertain how impact fees fractionally would go towards helping that initiative long-term.
So again, the collection of the matching funds is the question that
Well,
needs to be addressed.
You know, they have a period of time that they have to be spent. As in the past, when I first came on 17, 18 years ago, we had impact fees. And it was very clear how you could use those to offset some components that were specific to growth, right? I would see the same thing happening in the future. You have the opportunity to apply these funds to help augment bond indebtedness or what have you on a going forward basis.
And a question I would have for Jonathan, I did see your hand, if I could just follow up with a question for Jonathan, is you, and Paul stated this as well, it cannot have to do with, you know, just raising the standards of the learning space, but rather the capacity of the learning space. And for those of us who, you know, have a pretty in-depth knowledge of the plans for that middle school, high school complex, it was meeting both. It was meeting both capacity and raising the standards. How would the funding rules, would it distinguish between the two? Would it only cover the impact fees that be allowed to be used for certain aspects of that new complex that David is suggesting would be the plan moving forward?
In simple terms, it would just pay its proportional share. You're not going to separate the funds to say this is only for this physical room. So it's not to that degree of separation. It's simply to know that there is a capital investment, and we've calculated how much of that capital investment is attributed to new growth or new students. And simply it is paying, the fee is designed so that it's paying that proportional amount. So you don't have to do any other management or design of it. That is what's part of the deficiency category if you were to go down to the later part of the report and discuss how the fees are paying for the additional square footage, and there's a slight reduction to accommodate the existing deficiency. So we're not paying to remedy the problem today.
I'm not sure I understand your answer. So because I'll just kind of lay it out and you kind of break it down for me, right? Because it involves demolition after the construction of a new complex, what the proposal was. And please, school board members, correct me if my memory is incorrect. And it would also involve having a running track, having a performing arts center, in addition to, I think, you know, just nice amenities like a staircase for lunches and things that are very attractive. And it could potentially be argued that just having a flat floor versus a staircase would be the same cost. And so all of that would just be covered as a, you know, share between the impact fee and then the community match.
What community match?
Yeah,
are you talking about?
Oh, am I misunderstood it?
Well, I don't know. I keep hearing the word match. And I didn't see match in here.
Impact fee.
Well, it's the payment. It's, you know, the 90% of the cost,
Yeah.
the bonding.
Yeah, well, wherever it comes from. I mean, but the impact fee just goes towards, it has to have a project defined that the money could go towards either for engineering, planning, or design, and then for construction, for the purpose of somehow, you know.
Would it cover demolition?
Well, I don't.
No.
I don't.
Well, remember,
Yes.
all specific to enrollment related need. So it's a fraction. If enrollment has gone up, you know, 10%, then only a portion of the money that's being deployed can go towards that project. All other costs to that project have to be bared by, you know, statewide, you know, state, hopefully state funding percentage, local taxpayers. Really, that's it, right? Bonding. So
Thank
it's
you.
only the fraction that's related to enrollment that can really happen here.
Thank you. That clarified it for me. Mac and then Tom.
Paul, thank you. Paul, how many new units go online or get permits pulled in South Burlington annually on average?
About 140 a year is our average total new homes. That includes, single families or, 40 homes in a multifamily building. So it's dwelling units, it's about 140.
I think, Jonathan, you actually pulled that, right? That's in the report calculation.
Okay, so we're talking $3.5 million at their 25,000.
Yes, but a big chunk of those would be small. Our trend for the last several years is that a number of those are studio, one bedroom units. So, those would be in the proposal, in the outline that John had put together. They're not all at the high fee.
Would the impact fees apply to profit housing buildings?
John, I'm gonna let you take that question.
Can you repeat that question?
Would an impact fee be levied on a apartment complex that was, let's say, built by Summit Properties or Cathedral Square or Champlain Housing Trust?
The city can decide, and it's been common that the city has exempted, or I believe the appropriate term is waived, the impact fee for units that would be meeting certain affordable criteria.
Or used our housing trust fund?
Permanent affordability.
Now, the other half of that, John, is those students that might come from a building like that, they're still gonna exist. And so the school, the burden of paying to build the full school gets then shifted to some other source if you're exempting a portion of the need.
All right. Can we move on to Tom Chittenden's question, City Councilor?
So along those same lines, and I guess this question might fall to you, Jonathan Slason. I understand that we used to do it based on a duplex or a single unit, and then we got a better idea to possibly consider based on bedrooms. I'm wondering, I didn't see this in your report, but tell me if I just didn't look closely enough as I scanned through the 33 pages. Have we ever considered a square footage, so to be even more progressive, so as to look at how much square footage in either bedrooms or in house, and that way those with the larger homes maybe even make it a proportional ratio to the land usage of that residence, so as to impact the higher end homes more so than also adjusting for the affordable homes, but impacting less the homes with 3 smaller bedrooms and so on?
Yeah, I think that could be the next evolution of it. To be honest, the data just wasn't as readily available based on square footage relative to bedrooms. The census data helps us better understand and feel really comfortable with the bedroom count units by unit. But I believe that if we could probably investigate the per square foot unit, but absolutely that's kind of the most progressive approach on more or less the best equitable approach.
Yes, please.
So I guess I wanted to sort of step back and make sure I heard Superintendent Young's framing of this. I think what we're doing is what this community did 70 years ago, what other communities are doing all the time, is that we are thinking we might need a new school. And if we don't start planning and committing to either a new school or a massive upgrade to an existing school, then when Act 250 applications come before the school district, they're going to say we don't have the capacity. So that's where we are. So I would say in my 8 years on this council, and I know this has been 10 years, we've been talking about school infrastructure this whole time. So I think this body, the city council and the school board, we've been talking about this for 8 years, and the different notions that have come up. It was one, that mega school in the southeast quadrant that nobody liked. Then there was the other idea of another school district. I grew up in South Burlington, and as I look at South Burlington, I see 3 elementary schools where this Shelburne Road and Wilson Road are, but where all the growth has been is down in the southeast quadrant. So as I read this report, it seemed to make sense. The most palatable or most feasible thing that I don't know if the community has really put forward for a vote or for consideration is a 4th elementary school. And then the other thing where the real constraints are in the high school is an expanded wing. Now that the South Burlington Library is out of the high school, I'm wondering if that's where this conversation needs to go to next to create that project that would then give this impact fee something tangible, or if we just need to accept that we're not going to do these buildings and then start slowing growth. Is that the framing and the question that's before us here, Superintendent Young?
I think the first part of the framing was correct. I think the second part, there's been a lot of work around looking at feasibility, community-based schooling, upgrades to the high school, middle school. There's been a deep dive on the high school and the middle school. And so renovations really on the high school are really not cost effective at all, given the significant conditions of that building. So that being said, you're absolutely right that you've got growth occurring and you've got continued loading on these schools, and you do need to put some resources, we do as a city, into ensuring that they can continue to run and be effective. And you're right, under Act 250, anything that comes on, again, I'm not the Act 250 board, but I think the school district and community, and we're going to have to start to say loudly, we don't have capacity. And that's, I think, an important component to the evolution of our schools.
Nancy?
So I just want to do one more kind of framing in that conversation. And David, you and Helen and Dr. Childs and I have talked about this little. Saying on an Act 250 municipal questionnaire that we don't have capacity is a policy decision, right? And it has impacts on the future vision of our community. So what are the implications of that happening? It means if developers want to develop here, which they likely will continue, they will develop projects that don't have to go through Act 250, because that question is currently not asked in any other place. So I think at some point also the two bodies need to have a conversation about that policy question. If that's going to be the answer from the school district, so impact fees as a tool, are there other tools we could employ to get to a yes on that question? If this community wants to continue to be, a smart growth community where people can live and work in, a pedestrian bike oriented way. So I think that is also a question we need to answer in addition to just, in addition to infrastructure.
Yeah,
Dr. Oh,
good to differentiate. I mean, not everything that comes through is Act 250. You're absolutely right. So much of our growth can happen in just transitional housing. But I do think that when larger developments that are coming on that are required to go through Act 250, which seems to be happening a little bit more lately in South Burlington, which is positive news. People want to build here. It does trigger the Act 250. And so we do have this, I don't have capacity, right, on the questionnaire. And then on the other side, we're doing what we can where we don't have to accept, our students into the system.
So what happens when you answer no to those
It
questions?
does.
No, it really doesn't have a lot of weight under my understanding with the Act 250 board. That doesn't mean it can't, but I think it's pretty important. I don't think you'd want to be saying, no, we don't have capacity for fire, rescue, water, sewer. That may stop it, but when we say no on education, it doesn't. I think it is important from my perspective, and would plead with the Act 250 board to say they probably ought to be paying attention to that in communities that are seeing significant growth, right? Because again, I think obviously I'm biased I think it's a pretty important service.
Paul, I think you want to respond to this, and then I saw Dr. Trivia Childs turn on her camera, and if you want to ask a question, I'll let Paul respond, and then it's up to your turn.
Paul Connor, Planning and Zoning Director. Councilor Barrett, that's a really important question as to what Act 250 would do with it. Act 250 is a regulatory body. They're reviewing applications, and ultimately they're approving with conditions or denying, just like a local DRB. And so they're not a policy making board. They are responsible for making a decision on something that's in front of them. As I understand it, the direction that is given to the district commissions is that criterion is can be used to potentially attach conditions to a project, but in and of itself, that's not one of the criterion that a project can just be flat out denied on. So what Act 250 is looking for is what from any party that is expressing a concern, including the school board, in this case, the school district, what are you asking of Act 250 to do about it? And ideally, that would contain, we have this capital plan, and here would be a fee associated with it, just like if VTrans has a planned upgrade of an intersection to add a traffic light, they can say, you're creating 4 trips, you pay $1,800 towards that fee. It's a, as I understand it, relatively new area for them to be looking at because, not surprisingly, many schools in Vermont are not facing the same challenges we have. They have all sorts of challenges, but growth is not necessarily a statewide challenge. So it's not a fully, yeah, it's an area where we're all learning together, I guess is how I could best describe it.
Okay, so she just turned on her camera and she doesn't have a question. Okay. Any other questions? Please, yes, Michelle Boyer.
Michelle Boyer, School Board. I do want to understand a little bit better. We talk about predicted enrollment as a given. And so I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the modeling that gets us to, I think in the report, something like 150 new students by 2032. Please do correct me if I'm misremembering that. It was a couple of weeks ago that I read that. But the short question is just, can you talk a bit about how we got to that number? Does it utilize the full resource of historical data? In other words, as permits have been made and as homes have been built, and we've tracked enrollment in the schools, what does that relationship look like? In the world of modeling, that's pretty much the gold standard. The best predictions you're going to get are based on historical data, and then perhaps accounting for the differences in certain conditions. We just had a pandemic. How does that relate to it? Do we have more families? Does that pattern, is it expected to look different? So in other words, would that 150 possibly, if we use historical data, look bigger? Would it look smaller? I'm looking for a sense of certainty in the actual prediction of enrollment is the.
Yeah, the only thing,
question.
good questions. The only thing I can say is, we employed a demographer we've had now for 15 years. And at least from 2014 to now, the demographer has been pretty spot on predicting growth over the course, including telling us that we would at this point be at a problem state. So it certainly has confirmed. As far as predictions, I'm not in that, to be able to look back at the city and to be able to say what was dissimilar in the city 20 years ago to now. So as historical projections, you've done some things in the city to bring in more affordable housing, right? So trying to match up historic to now, I think it's hard to predict, would be my guess. You'd have to look at every action of the city and to see what that did, right? Including some of the newer infrastructure here on Market Street, right? Has created some excitement, which may have had significant impact on new enrollment, which we know it did, right? On Market Street here with the students. And I think that you kind of need to keep after that on an ongoing basis to look at, for every action, what reaction do you have with enrollment,
Tom.
Well, just to respond to that too, agree with what the superintendent said. We have at the city side and in partnership with David been talking about exactly how we build our systems moving forward so we can look at that real-time modeling and how we do some combined demography and look back at our last 10 years of permits by address and provide that data to the school's enrollment folks so they can overlay the student address list to that. So that is work certainly we are interested in. I think both sides, we're very interested in making that happen, but it doesn't currently exist in our data structures.
Cal? Sorry, Jonathan.
I'm happy to, for the purposes of the impact fee, right, there were no forecasts made. We're using the agreed set of forecasts that the demographer has come up with, which forecasts something around just under 2,800 students by year 2032. And based on those forecasts, that's where the capital needs started to arrive from. So these are the two kind of fixed inputs from the impact fee process. But I will say that based on the changing mixture of households, this is a conversation that Paul Connor and we've had from earlier meetings in this process, is that there's a profound shift in the types of households, the number of bedrooms. And if we expect that the students per bedroom unit behaves like we're seeing, we're seeing that the average number of increase of students is somewhere between 18 to 23, on the average around 22 students per year. And that actually directly aligns with the McKibben demographic forecasts. So I would say from two different angles, I have a degree of confidence that we're in the ballpark. We're seeing growth happen using that 140 household units per year as a long-term trend. Clearly, interest rates and things might affect the next few years, but maybe it'll be bumping up after that. So that's why that historical long-term trend is pretty powerful to have that visibility for that duration. So maybe that gives you just some additional context.
Okay, Councilor Chittenden.
I'll pick up Tom Chittenden, City Councilor, pick up on that thread and also what I heard School Director Boyer, nice to meet you in person, stated, yeah, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So I definitely love that quote. And that's what I think I heard you say there too. And just from a layman's perspective and somebody that knows this community, and we all know that the Southeast Quadrant is a lot different today than it was 20 years ago. What I also heard from Superintendent Young and from City Manager, as well as Paul Connor, that even if we say no in that Act 250 form, there's ways to avoid Act 250 and those houses will still come online. So I just think quite obviously with the growth that South Burlington's seen is we need another school. I'll say it, I'm falling off the city council, so I think it's going to be before all of you over the next couple of years. But I just think quite intuitively and obviously, as you look at where the schools are in South Burlington, we need another elementary school. But that's my personal opinion, not having a vote on it tonight. And as soon as that is committed to, I think we can move forward with these impact fees. And then as for the high school, which is also in dire need either of a complete renovation, that too is something we've already addressed. We took it up, 3 years ago? And I think that's the next step too.
So the next step, that was what I was hoping to get to, is David had suggested that there would be a subcommittee working on this. Is that something that you have discussed in your meetings with Helen Reilly and Treva Childs?
No, so I think, I mean, what we've talked about, Dr. Childs, Chair Reilly, and myself and Jesse, is the importance of a shared demographer, one. And then, as we've already said earlier, teasing out what was permitted and expected based on the numbers of children that these units would bring. And then being able to take that exact location and for us to populate it with the number of students that are actually there, to be able to compare that data. So that's kind of our work currently in play. And we think that will, again, to Jonathan's point, will further validate the need. I think that what's before you right now is to discern whether or not impact fees are entertained, right? The board, the school board certainly wants to have your input on how best to move forward. Do we move forward or not? I think they're wanting your feedback. We did have it, as Jonathan said on one of our earlier meetings, but there were questions and they want to, I think, speaking for the board a bit, they wanted to make sure there's some comfort and understanding about impact fees and what that means, what it does, what it doesn't do. And I think everyone's sensitive to taxation or over taxation and wanting to not, tax people out of coming here. So I think that was kind of a concern, but certainly the reason for impact fees is directly correlated to enrollments, right? Similar to what you have currently in play, and I'm not sure all of the current impact fees that people pay when they they build in South Burlington now, right? They have fire and water and police and those types of things, right? They currently have those that are currently impact fees that are on.
So I'm turning to my city manager and deputy. Will the voters have the say on whether or not we have an impact fee instated, or is that truly our council decision? It's an ordinance that we go through public hearings on, and okay, that we pass as a council. Okay, good to know. And timing is another question I have.
Well, I think, we've been at the conversation with impact fees for quite a while. You know, I've had it on with Jonathan now for a good bit of time. There's been a couple of years of us wanting to discuss and hopefully reenact impact fees. So I think timing is important to begin the process, to begin the collection. I do see that as you move forward as a city, we as a city, you've got to have multiple resources that are going to come in to help offset growth. To think that you're going to do a large capital campaign on property taxes alone is problematic. And so I think every little bit will count to help offset those costs so you don't have such high tax related matters. So I think the timing is important, but I think you want to do your due diligence as you're doing here tonight to make sure that you're in agreement and understanding, and you have expressed your concerns and cautions as the board has. And then it goes back to the council if the board's going to move it that way, because the board really just needs to say, yes, we want you to explore the impact fees. Council takes it, council then moves that to ordinance processes and go forward from there.
Has the board said that yet?
The board has not. The board really felt like, again, I don't want to speak for the board, but they felt like this was an important step to do some sharing and listening with you. And I think they'll need to make a determination whether they let it sunset or whether they want to say, yeah, we'd like to have it move forward to the city council.
So
Jessie.
Dr. Childs has indicated she would like to.
Yes, please, Dr. Childs.
I don't understand why. I mean, because everything's going to fall back on the board of directors, as it always does with getting it approved. So I'm just trying. Is there an answer? How about we had a scenario? Okay, we can't allow any more people to move to South Burlington. Can that happen?
I don't think so.
No.
No.
So what can we do?
Well, what I was gonna ask, my next question, Travia, was we have a city council retreat on July 11th. Is that something that would be included in our discussion? That's the first question. And the second question was more for the school board and thus for you, Dr. Childs. Is this something that you would like to have included in your budget discussions for next March town meeting when you come forward perhaps with capital improvement plan?
Yes.
The timing is an important question for us to, if we're working under a March 2023, town meeting kind of deadline, I think we need to talk about it on July 11th and potentially come to something in, late summer so that, the acting superintendent, the interim superintendent and the school board can really start running those numbers, right?
So if I'm understanding your question, so the council can put whatever you would like on the policies and strategies on July 11th at our retreat. If you're asking about, so the voters wouldn't have to vote on the impact fees, but the voters would have to vote on the match or the bond.
Right.
And that's really something that, I'm speaking solely as your staff now and not as David's partner. That's something that the school really primarily owns. The city council traditionally has not, other than being partners, has not been involved in the decision-making around what's bonded. I was gonna make one more point. So, and again, as your staff person, not David's partner, I think that I would really encourage the council to receive a specific recommendation from the school board and respond to that politically, rather than trying to understand as a city council what the impact fee level should be, what the match percentage should be, what the capital projects are going to be, because that's really something that you all don't have visibility into. You don't know the details of what the needs are within the school district. I mean, it's a great report and we can read it, but I think that really is what the policy that rests with the school board, and the recommendation from the school board to the council, in my opinion, should be as detailed as possible. And then you would react and do the ordinance process and whatnot.
And I think we'd have to go on a deep dive at the city council.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
I don't
But
think it has to be that big a deep dive, but if the board comes to us with a plan that they approve where they want to collect impact fees for a specific project, then it's up to us to decide whether we want to have an impact fee and then determine the formula and then implement it as fast as possible to harvest all the permits that are gonna come from Cider Mill 2, Spear Meadows, and O'Brien Hillside Farm, and wherever else, evolves in the next year or so.
Well, I'm not talking a month of a deep dive. I'm talking about,
Well, the
that'll involve several layers of.
The deep dive
of
is simply to
thinking
take a
about-
look at this report and understand whether we agree whether the formula is equitable
Mhm.
in our perspective, right? And then modify it as we desire. That's all. I mean, that could be, 1 or 2 nights, but it's not. I mean, there's already a proposal there, so we just move forward with that and decide what we want to do.
That's exactly right.
All right,
Is there an
thank you.
opportunity to maybe add 2 points quickly, if you don't mind?
Please. Yes.
I
Jonathan.
think to complement both the 2 comments that were just made, the impact fees need to reflect all other funding sources. And so the magnitude that you're seeing in this draft report, you need to be very sensitive that it does not include any financing costs. It also, to David's point, is unlikely to be only complemented with a debt instrument. We probably expect some grants or other funding. And impact fee is the last in that line of funding. And so the magnitude will be a result of after those other funding sources are generally better understood and defined. And so you need the capital cost estimate, and then you need a better estimate of the debt financing, and then whether there's any other grant funding. And then the impact fees will scale appropriately. And to the last comment there, at that point, there'll be the legal maximum, and then the political reality can come in and say, how do we want to fit this to meet South Burlington?
Yeah, because I go back to the middle school, high school complex. That was asking people to sign up for a major change over, 2 decades at least. Was it 3 decades?
3 decades.
Yes, and that's going to take some thinking on our part as we have our own capital improvement plan. That's going to take some thinking on our part as we're thinking, So I think that 2 evenings is a little ambitious, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, Megan, it's not that you're deciding on what that plan will be. What you're reacting to is the impact fees, in that you've got growth that's happening.
Mhm.
And the suggestion is that you have the ability to collect impact fees to help offset in whatever fractional amount you want to
Mhm.
move forward to help offset those growth. And again, I don't, the correlation is, what do you do if you put in it, significant developments on for water? Your water treatment folks need to come to you and say, we need, so they're gonna come up with that plan. Or sewer, right?
Yeah,
Or fire or rescue, they're gonna come up with that. Very much different magnitude here.
Yeah.
But the same thing is in play here, where then the school board and school community are going to need to figure how we're going to continue to evolve and make space for the added increased enrollment, right? So I think, and right for you wanting to get deep into the conversation around what that will look like, but what we're trying to indicate through impact fee is that there is growth. Does it substantiate that in the report? And does the report have appropriate metrics where you then can take that and move it forward, perhaps, or not, to help offset that growth?
Well, I tend to think that as we sign on, thank you, Kate. I'll let you speak before I respond. Please, Kate Bailey, School Board Director.
Thanks, Megan. Sorry for that. My question to the City Council in the recommendation from the school board is whether you are looking for a recommendation of impact fees as a concept and what we want those impact fees to fund, or if you're looking for a specific recommendation and endorsement of a formula. Because tonight I'm hearing Jonathan Slason's report outlines one formula, which is fee by bedroom. I appreciate Council Chivin's suggestion of by square footage. I think that's really interesting. And I'm learning for the first time tonight about the previous impact fee based on single family versus multi-unit. And that feels like 3 very different models and different decisions that that could be a school, part of the school board recommendation, or it could be fully in the city council seat. And I would like clarity if the city council would like a recommendation about impact fees globally or specific to a formula.
No, I think we just want the fact that you would like to see some impact fees, period. And you have a project to receive those funds. That's all we have to hear. Then we can take the report and determine the formula from the report.
Great, thanks.
I just want to state then what I was going to state prior, which is that if we are receiving a 210 million now changed for inflation and change in cost of materials project and saying, okay, we're going to just make sure that there are impact fees so that we can move forward with this project, we are marrying ourselves to that project as a board. And I think that it's kind of it's something that we really need to consider, because it is a political decision. It is a decision about whether or not we are getting behind a $210 million project. If in fact, that is the project that they submit to us. Please, Matt.
I wanted to raise up that comment and the comment made earlier about the timing that you did. Obviously, we know what's coming online. They haven't pulled the permits yet. If we do the impact fees now, the question I have, and not for the lawyer in the room, but for our lawyer, which is, can the proposal from the school board to utilize the impact fees that the city council creates, can that evolve based on what happens 2 years from now or a year from now in terms of
Can it be changed?
Yeah, like an impact fee could be to mitigate the number of students coming in with trailers. Now, we don't want to see trailers, but that would be a mitigation expense that would, seems to me, I'm not a lawyer, be a viable way to spend those impact funds. That's not what we want to do. But if that other reality doesn't, speaking to your point about what's our fiduciary, what's our legal responsibility, if we collect all these impact fees, we don't spend them, we've got to pay them back.
Yeah, we're liable.
So can we in fact avoid what you said, which is marry ourselves to a project that we don't know if there's political support by providing a plan to spend the impact fees that are perhaps not there yet, but it can evolve if there's the political acceptance of a much larger project. I don't know the answer to that, but I'd like to know.
But I think that takes more than perhaps just a couple of nights figuring out how we want to, make an algorithm that works. And Brian, unless this was a direct response to Brian, Minier, excuse me.
Yeah, no, it's fine. And I'm sorry, I'm having my own technical difficulties. I meant to be there in person, but my car is in for inspection, and I meant to show myself on camera, but I'm using my wife's computer, so various issues. But I think a couple of things. One is, we seem to be framing this up as we did a couple of years ago. Sorry, I should say I was a school board member until March 1st, and I am now running for state rep. Don't know if I'll get elected or not. But I do have some knowledge from the last time we tried to do all this stuff. And I'm concerned that we're going to go under where we need to be. And there are two reasons for that. One is our demographer, he's wonderful, but he misestimated and he underestimated the amount of kids that were going to move into our district because it's a pandemic, because the rural parts of Vermont are emptying out. And so these housing units near Central that weren't supposed to have kids coming to school had a ton. And that effect may still be in play depending on how the pandemic plays out. The other one is there is a false framing of, let's do a $209.6 million project, or let's do something really cheap. And the truth is, if you just want to fix the physical plant at the middle school and high school, and this is in 2018 or $19, so it's going to be much higher now, that was $60 million. With financing, that's $100 million. And so we're not looking at something cheap. There is no cheap option. So there are going to be more people coming, there are going to be more students coming, and there is no cheap option. And I can leave it there. I'm happy to answer anything. I'm happy to join later too, and I'm sorry for the difficulties. But I think that needs to be borne in mind when you're considering how to go forward.
Thank you, Brian. First Paul Connor and then Councillor Chittenden.
Just a note for you all to consider is, as you're discussing the question of whether to have an impact fee and then the formula of it, the formula to me is a little bit on the technical end. I think a key question for you all will be what John Slason presented was what could be allowed. Anything between 0 and that number is what you could select anywhere in there. And so how you want to evolve that discussion and whether that discussion starts with the school board as part of an overall funding formula and you get feedback about what the implications of a high number versus a low number are. I think that's, as you consider your discussions and where that should take place of school board, council, and steering committee, I think that's a key one in there.
Thank you.
And just for clarity, the legal maximum was 25,000, was that right, as a straight average without applying a bedroom model or a square footage?
Right. There is some fluidity to that, to estimating the mix of housing units by bedroom going forward to the future. But the legal maximum by the bedroom units was up to that 42,000 for the 3-bedroom, and at this point, the rough average of $25,000. So those are the legal maximums at this point in time.
Which is 10 times what the last impact fee was.
It is not inexpensive. And if I could just maybe comment to Councilor Coda's comment about, you could use impact fees immediately to pay for the modular units that are going in, because they have a duration of in excess of 5 years. And you could implement something today and then increase the fee in 2 years from now if there's more certainty for a larger expenditure. So it is flexible to that way.
Yeah, the fluidity of the impact fee number, I mean, as we evolved, as I remember turning it off, we minimized the collection down because there was less and less growth. So between the city and the school, I remember that amount went down to at some point, and then we turned it off, took it away. Same thing could happen here too. The school board could say, we'd like you to look at, implementing and working to the ordinance and starting out at this level and be able to revisit it regularly on a going forward basis based on what you're seeing and what's happening within the community.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilor Chittenden.
We're over on time, and my comment's not important, but that's a really good closing point. Let's do
Yes,
this.
it is a good closing point. I just wanted to pass along a concern. I told the parent I would tonight, and she hasn't appeared. There is very real concern, especially in the communities of Orchard and Rick Marcotte Central School, about overcrowding. These are our elementary schools that David has cited as reaching maximum capacity. In the interim, what do you see going forward for those communities?
Yeah, so we are at maximum. We're actually over maximum, somewhere 150, 160 over capacity at both Rick Marcotte and Orchard. And currently in play, again, the board moved forward the placement of what we're calling zero energy modules. The financing has to be determined on how we're going to do that. But to your point, we're needing to do that now to help make way for capacity. And as of today, we're hearing that we're likely far exceeding what we even expected for next year, right? So the urgency, these ZEMs are planned and would like to be placed on the school property by somewhere in that mid-November timeframe, if we could. Again, these are not trailers like you have wherever the school is over here. They're not the trailers. They're actual, classrooms that get craned in. They're built, at a warehouse, and they come and they look very much like a classroom.
Yep.
And they're high energy efficient and can be good for as long as 100 years to give us some time to do the exact type of conversation that you're doing right now as a city and school. How do we want to evolve?
And I will say, I've said it in the past, and then we'll move on. I've been inside those ZEMs, and they're like a classroom.
Yeah.
They're truly like a classroom. And I want to say that I would have no issues having my daughter be in a ZEM. All right, thank you very much. That was an important first discussion. I know, was it, Tim, were you on the subcommittee talking about the impact fee?
Yeah, I missed the last meeting.
So I want to thank you too for being on that committee. So we're on to item number 6, hold a legislative session wrap-up discussion with the current South Burlington State Delegation. And we have Representative Nita Townsend, Representative John Kalarkey, Representative Ann Pugh are here. And did I miss anybody? I don't see. Okay, we have three.
And Senator.
And Senator Chittenden, of course.
Over here.
Yeah.
City council.
Yes.
Yeah, right, yeah.
No.
The second half. All right, and I don't have specifically a person in charge of this discussion, so I see here that we have the legislative summary that hopefully you've all had a chance to look at. Is this a question answer period, or did the three of you come prepared to state a few things that you thought were important updates? Or I think it's question answer period is how I interpret the looks in the audience. All right, yes. Jeff?
David, did you want to say any introductory pieces? I think this was kind of.
Yeah, no,
your
yeah,
response.
so we typically, again, we've been so fortunate, not that you guys are, to have really good legislative folks, and we've had a lot of opportunity to weigh in and be part of, and so I think it's a great opportunity to say thank you, first of all. And I know I've been called many times and had the opportunity to testify many times throughout my time. That being said, I think this is a really, really important time to do the kind of conversations. Typically, when you get into session, then it's very difficult to help bring about the change or the information that you need. So I think it's really an important time to have kind of a legislative wrap up and conversation for the future to talk about what are the things that are most pressing and most need to be paying attention to. And so I just feel like it's always, it never seems to be enough time in exactly the right time. But I feel like this is really kind of, you've had a bit of pause now, you've come out, you've been able to take a bit of a breath. We've seen now some of the things that are now going to be put into place through the outcomes of the session. What does that look like? What impacts will they have? And what might be the things on the future that we want to be paying attention to? I have a few things just from the school side of things around, some of the worries and thoughts that I have on a going forward basis. But I think it's important to hear from you folks, if you will, around what you'd like us to be doing, or what you would like us to be paying attention to as you're fresh out of session.
Can I just add, having part of the reason for this in the steering committee was a outgrowth of our conversation, Jesse, myself, Dr. Childs, and our superintendent about, what would be helpful. And I think it needs to be a two-way conversation, which is why I invited, or thought it was important that candidates come to listen. This isn't a forum for you, but I think it's our opportunity in a timely way to say these are the things that perhaps haven't been addressed, that you may not be aware of, but are really important. I mean, I think it is important to acknowledge what advances have been made and how that impacts us. But I think there's also some really important parts of the educational funding and processy conversation that our representatives need to hear from the school board and potentially, the city council. We have issues too. It's not just all about education. So that, I think, is adding to David's kind of crafting of this dialogue. So I hope that's helpful.
Not to put Senator Chittenden on the spot, but you were on the education committee, and you're, just out of your first term here, or not quite, you got through December, early January, but do you have insights, having now served on the inside after seeing it from our perspective, on what we could be doing better, what Emily and Brian and you could
Certainly. So I get to claim new guy status for, I think, another month. But I would definitely want to yield to Maida Townsend, John Kalaki, and Ann Pugh to also chime in on their many years of service and to recognize that. As for the Education Committee, we did spend a lot of time, and I did write this up on my Facebook page, so you can speak to it there. But we did spend a lot of time on the new pupil weighting. Happy to hear David Young's thoughts too, his outgoing thoughts on how that's going to affect South Burlington. I have not yet seen the updated or recalibrated numbers as to how that will impact it, but based on the 2020 numbers, it does look like South Burlington will see, because of the new weighting, an increase in our tax rates or a decrease in our taxing capacity, not as extreme as some other communities. One thing that I think is important to keep in mind, and I don't know how much we've all paid attention to it, again, love to hear David Young's perspective, but the universal meals, the 1 year that we're going to use some of the excess funding from the revenue the property tax revenue that we had over and above what we had expected, the $90 million, we extended for 1 year universal meals post-pandemic. So that will give all school districts an idea to have a clear understanding of what that costs. So that after this year, it'll be a question before this school district, absent action by the legislature, to continue the mandate of universal meals. It might be up to individual communities to choose whether or not they want to ask their voters to pay for universally available free meals. I personally, as one legislature, had real concerns and reservations about that. I ultimately did vote for it. But I'm worried that we are funding universal meals for families that might already have the means to pay for and to pay into a system to provide for food. So should it go forward and should the legislature, I will push harder than I did this time for revenue streams to fund that. One thing that I think that we could have done was online sports betting. That wouldn't encourage it. It would actually just allow Vermont to tap into a revenue stream that I would say people are already, with the Vermont lottery tax, feeds into our school fund or ed fund. I think that's an extension of that online sports betting could be a revenue stream for that. Candy tax, I abide, since you asked for insights and you put me on the spot, Councillor Emery, I have a phrase that I use a lot: with tax what you don't like and subsidize what you do. I don't think we need more sugary sweets and more candy to be easily accessible, and there's economic incentives to tax those products and to fund schools for it. So I personally am one to support a sweetened sugar candy tax. So those are some initial thoughts. I really like the links that were passed around in our booklets. I could use the whole 30 minutes if you want me to keep talking about these things. I hope that was insightful enough for you, putting me on the spot here, but happy to dig deeper if you have some more pointed questions. But maybe I'd yield to some of our seasoned legislators to comment on these topics.
Well, David, one part of this puzzle, of course, is Act 250. And we thought we had crafted a way to make it more locally and regionally specific and controlled, but the governor vetoed that bill.
Which act was that? And what was it about?
It was to take the Act 250 governance structure and make it more regional.
Oh, okay.
And the governor vetoed it. So there's been no progress on Act 250, despite a lot of legislative time and input from people on it. So sadly, that's going to be still a complex piece for what we're talking about tonight.
And I see you at Representative Pugh, and I was listening to a radio program about the importance of early child education, as well as kind of the mindfulness and the emotional awareness that we need to teach our young children in order to prepare them for better learning. I don't know if in your committee you were able to address any of those things. I know as a parent of a student at Chamberlain Elementary School, they have been on WCAX and really highlighted for their, I would just say, excellence in terms of how they prepare students, just for in terms of their emotional awareness and their emotional social preparation in order to learn, right? In order to be open to learning. And I don't know if there are things that we as local officials here should know about your work. And thank you for your 30 years.
God, that sounds like a long time.
Sounds like a lot of work. It sounds like a lot of good work. And if you were reelected, it clearly was good work.
Thanks. As it relates to early early care and education, or as we're thinking about it from an education frame, pre-K, there continues to be trying to figure out how to meld and coordinate an education focus, pre-K, with a childcare focus. Not that their foci are different, but as we try to incentivize more providers, and they want higher salaries, and as we want to have universal pre-K be more than 10 hours a week, and providers are looking to mirror the public schools schedule, that does create some dilemmas for those families who need childcare 300 days of the year, if not 340 days of the year. The legislature, so we're working on that. I mean, and so that is something that I think the school board may want to think about and provide some input. And that may be something if Senator Chittenden remains on education, for him to be able to share that voice with you. A lot of the things that we, and that comes down to, how do we fund it? How do we fund ensuring that kids have a good start? And then we have, how do we make it affordable? I want to say this begins to sound like healthcare. It's a three-legged stool. And to make it affordable, the legislature, I want to say, I think it was 2 sessions ago, put in place some funding, as well as put in place some strategies to make it, to both put more money into, more resources into the hands of private providers, as well as to make it more affordable to families. For instance, to have the copays be by family size rather than by individual, to have a family copay rather than individual child copay. And none of that has been able to been implemented, all based on an issue with IT, which is something that, being in the legislature for 30 years, is not necessarily a strength of mine to understand, but it's a problem. And the IT systems and capacity in the Department of Children and Families predates me, and probably predates if we added all of our ages together. And they can't even find people to fix that. So they're not even going to be able to come back with things that, in terms of cost until March. That said, I think that we have made some significant strides in ensuring during these last couple of years, the best we could, that the children had safe places to go and got good quality early care and education, which was probably more than you were asking for. I apologize.
No, this is not more. This is the most important thing. This is what the future of our society is based upon, and so never enough time.
Well,
Yes, John?
I think both Representative Townsend and Senator Chittenden both texted me saying, well, we did do a lot of housing, and I think that's pertinent to what we're talking about today. And in the spring, there's about $45 million of additional federal dollars that went into housing for the state, and primarily to build affordable housing. But we also took out some of the zoning issues in Act 250, and moved those to housing to encourage communities to do a deeper density and infill density. So that has been moved forward, and that was accepted. We also have money in there. I was telling our city manager that there's $1 million to have one community work in an integrated way with housing and zoning and all the city departments working together. So she's in contact with Commissioner Josh Hanford about that. While it's mostly affordable housing, there is about $15 million put aside for what's called the missing middle, which actually could impact South Burlington a great deal, where the developer would get their development costs subsidized. So if a house costs $350,000 to build, the developer would get about $50,000 towards that. So it would still be sold at $350,000, but it would only cost the buyer $300,000. It's to encourage sort of the upcoming middle class, so the young families, the first-time home buyers, to see if they can buy into this market. It's sort of a big experiment, and it is with federal dollars, so we'll see if it works. It's, we had to push to make sure there was a kind of permanent affordability to those kinds of houses as well, so that so your family got one, and then you flip it 2 years later for the full price, and it's like, well, wait a minute, yours was subsidized and was, because it's a different model for the state to invest. Because usually it's investment in permanent affordability, or a shared equity model. So we did have to put a shared equity model into this as well, but it's a brand new experiment that's going to be happening in the state to help.
John, is there an impact fee concept embedded in that for the education for the schools?
No. But that would impact all of us here that, it seems obvious that we have to do this with the schools, where we don't have schools. So anyway, the state sadly, as I understand it, stepped out of helping with construction costs. And the state is hearing that from every community, that there has to be a different model. And so I think that that's going to be a big issue, and one that, needs to really be loudly said to the legislators. And I mean, Senator Chitner knows this. That will be a big cause next year about what does this do? Because we're talking about the cost at South Burlington. It's billions of dollars, that is real in the schools.
If I could add in on this, well, first of all, so that I don't forget to say it, in the budget which has been enacted now, and will go into effect July 1, there are substantial investments in the functions of state government as they relate to being able to support vulnerable Vermonters, families, communities, children. Over a period of years, state government has in effect been starved in terms of support for the human factor, the workers, as well as things such as Rep. Pugh was referring to the IT components. We now have in place really substantial investments in rebuilding in terms of personnel who are there to provide services as needed, assuming we can find the people to hire the personnel there, as well as the nuts and bolts necessary to deliver for any number of programs, including the early childhood piece, all that IT, just millions. And with a look forward, not only in just 1 year, and not only the implementation, but the maintenance thereof. So a lot of thinking into a piece that I would really ask you to contemplate is the degree to which there will be so many new people in both chambers And you folks have always been great about having conversations with us, reaching out, knowing full well it's not helpful if you wait till the last minute to share. Because then it's like, what do you want us to do? We can't. Yeah. But you may find that there are different thoughts on various issues. For instance, the sports betting, for years, that has not, it's the House that has absolutely been death on that issue. I have no tea leaves, but there may be a different take on that. As just one example, moving forward, I'm not saying that I'd vote for it, but, because I wouldn't. It's a reality. You know, there are going to be so many new people, and heaven only knows what their approach will be on any number of issues. With regard to the universal meals, it's important to keep in mind that there is work being done through joint fiscal between sessions, looking at potential sources of revenue. But it's also important to know that part of the thinking that went into ultimately, at least on the House side, ultimately saying yes to the 29 million to come out of the ed fund for that, I hate to use the word surplus, but the amount of money that was available from the ed fund to be used for various supports of the schools. Part of the thinking was, well, you know, granted, there are families that perhaps do not need the assistance to pay for the meals, but we don't divide by way of capacity that families may have as to who gets to ride the school bus, or who does or doesn't pay extra to have their books. And, you know, the belief was, and this was really strong in appropriations in the House, that it's part of what school is all about. People can't learn if they don't have, you know, food, and we didn't want to get into.
What was even interesting is that they wore the same T-shirts for the promotion day in 5th grade at Chamberlain
Oh, yes.
Elementary. And I think there's something to be said where we're all on the same.
So I'm just trying to bring forward to you different ways of thinking as they have been, and who knows what the ways of thinking will be moving forward on any of these issues, while at the same time we already have in place some stronger than has been in the immediate past supports for communities and the families through the investments we've made in state government. Investing in state government is not a bad thing. It is a bad thing when people turn to their state government and we don't have the capacity to respond. We respond just inadequately, you know, so we tried to address that.
My suggestion would be to repeat a meeting, Jesse, you did with us a year or two ago, and sit down and say, here are the needs in the city. And maybe have our new head of our schools as well there, and just with the legislators, and do it after the November election, because there'll be 4 new House people, right? And probably some new senators as well. So it would be really important to hear how we can serve the city, you know, and what the needs are. I think that because you're going to be needing to educate all these citizen legislators. You certainly educated me when we had that meeting, but I was very clear about what you saw were the needs in South Burlington, and I think that was really helpful. And then we were able to, in our different committees and across chambers, we worked together on it, you know, and it was the 4 with Martin Lalonde and Ann Pugh, and we were a team with Tom, and we actually worked behind the scenes on things together all the time, but we also knew what was important. So I think that is really key, you know, we'll have our new school leader, right? And maybe if the two of you would be willing to do that, you know. Us no longer relevant legislators will be glad to come as well. Okay.
No, certainly willing to be advocates, but this no longer relevant thing.
Oh, I think.
Yes, Jesse.
Thank you so much, Representative. That was really kind of you to say, and I agree with you. I think that that is something that I know Andrew and I have talked about doing after the election. I also want to just acknowledge that our current elected officials have done an amazing job using the professional expertise that we have on staff through Chief Burke and Tom DePietro and Bob Fisher and Paul Connor. You know, we have a lot, and I know the same happens with your team as well, Superintendent. And I really appreciate that mutual shared kind of professional respect, almost outside of the politics of it, but just what would this stormwater regulation mean on the ground for the folks running the stormwater utilities? And I really appreciate that shared relationship over the years. So we will continue to focus on that.
And thinking of, I trust there's already been or will be soon, if not already, an outreach with regard to the beginning steps on that dispatch.
Yes.
Thank you.
We may have a new fire chief coming on board who may be the chair of the regional Channing County Public Safety Authority, who is on top of getting that funding in place for us. Yes, thank you
And
very much for that support.
On the guardrails, which
Yes.
were the mutual agreement, the Solomon solution was attained.
And the changeover is profound in the House. The 11 committees, 7 committee chairs are no longer returning. And in appropriations, where every dollar goes, we're the policy, that they're the dollar people.
Every dime.
Every dime. 7 of the 11, 7 of the 11 are not returning.
Yeah.
So it's the complete leadership structure of the House is going to shift radically with people in new roles. And I don't know if that's going to be as profound in the Senate or not.
I have a quick question, if it's a quick answer. I think the city is concerned about the VEMR's pension and the school board's concerned about the VESTER's pensions. Can you just quickly say what action was taken about those two pension systems?
Well, S-286 is the bill which ultimately became law upon, well, will take effect. It unanimous override of the governor's veto of that bill by both chambers, unanimous. And goodness, there are several components to it. If you want to do the deep dive into the detail, you go to the Joint Fiscal Office website, on the legislative website, Joint Fiscal Office, and you just look up the fiscal note for S-286.
Okay.
And it's as clear as day. It is a fabulous 13-page, step by step by step. VEMR's was not included in that bill. VEMR's was dealt with separately because that came up in a different time frame, and it was more just if nothing is pro forma as it relates to many things in state government, but it was more a pro forma shift that needed to be made for the VEMR's every so often. It has to happen. In stark contrast to the months of effort on the part of the task force to come to their own unanimous agreement on the steps to move forward, which are articulated in that fiscal note, which, when all is said and done, takes $2 billion right off the unfunded liability in terms of changes, right off the top. It's for both VISTERS and the state employee, the teacher's pension and the state employee's pension for both There are changes in how much people pay. There are changes. It does not impact anyone who's already retired.
Right. Okay.
There was great concern over that. But go to Joint Fiscal Office, S286 fiscal note. It's fabulous.
Can't wait.
You have any trouble, let me know and I'll send you a link.
Any questions that people still have for our very, very fine, I agree, very fine representatives over many, many years? Maida?
If I could, I'm sorry, I need to apologize because I kept saying VEMR's. Not everybody in the world knows what VEMR's is. VEMR's is the Vermont Municipal Pension System, whereas VISTERS is the teachers and VSERS is the state employees. You got to see those acronyms to understand that exactly.
Thank you. Thank you. And I bet Maida would take calls even past January. She has definitely got a handle of all the fine nickels and dimes and details of our state budget, bills and all kinds of things. Any other questions?
I do have a question for Sean. You mentioned the expected change in the overall funding for South Burlington based on the change in per pupil weighting. Do you have even a back of the napkin guesstimate of what that's going to look like?
Part of what the House passed capped the total possible increase or decrease in our taxing capacity or burden to us to no more than 5% each year. So I liked what the Senate had passed, which was actually a rolling average, so that it would just phase in over 6 years. I thought it would gradually increment in. This could create a perverse incentive to increase spending in a district while you can't be penalized by more than 5%. But short answer to your question, back of the envelope for the next 5 years. And there is also a mechanism that forces the legislature to reconsider this over that time period and by the 5th year, or else it reverts back to the previous weights. But the South Burlington tax rate will not increase based on this new pupil weighting more than 5% each year for the next 5 years. Correct me if you have a different interpretation of it, but that was the cap that the House approved in order to phase in these adjustments. That being said, I'll put aside South Burlington, when you look at what the 2020 figures were and what the rates would be based on those numbers, would have seen, based on the new pupil weights, a 5-cent tax rate increase. So that was mid-range. Some of the most impacted communities are CBU, MMU come to mind. If those numbers had been taken into effect, they would have seen a 23-cent increase on their tax rate. So that might give you some frame of reference. Based on these adjustments, communities like Burlington and Winooski will benefit greatly from this. So their communities will see sort of the opposite side of that and decreases of up to 20 to 30 cents, I think, in some calculations. Based on how we assess the true cost of some children that have English language or multi-language learners that are also on free and reduced meals plans. So this adjusts the pupil weights based on indicators, trackable indicators. So the bill also adjusts how we measure those, how we track what a student truly costs based on some work done by a University of Vermont professor. Very complicated. Happy to point you in some.
Yeah, no, I've actually read the legislation. I was curious about, just that bottom line dollar. What does that look like in terms of the budget? We're at before ESSER 55-ish, 51-ish, 52. Is it 5 million less? Is it?
I'm waiting for updated figures that come out, I think, after July 1st when
They're doing the modeling. Yeah, but we know it's going to be significant, although phased. And I know we're at time, and I don't want to elongate, but I think this is in part connected to a lot of the kind of current conditions and the work forward. I've been at this a long time, 34 years, and never been in education where the funding is predicted. Education funding is not predictable. We're not in a situation where you can predict what the tax rate will be next year. It's very hard to build upon a system or sustain a system if you don't have financial predictability. When yield and all of the factors that you just talked about have significant play, makes it very difficult to sustain programming. So financial predictability is a big, big need in Vermont. The way in which we do it, we don't get our data until we're well into the budget adoption or after, makes it extremely difficult to do, where you could have a 6 to 10% swing, either negative or positive, in a 2-year period. It could be in year one, you have a slight 5% reduction with the same budget, with a slight increase in employee costs, could see a 10% increase because of a yield, common level of appraisal, and some of these other factors that are put on there. You know, and I could go on. I think that the biggest takeaway for me would be is to really develop some thoughtful discussions in the city of South Burlington to try to be as proactive and planned as possible. And I think to your point earlier, John, it would be really helpful to have an earlier session than even November. And what I've said often to my own group of the Superintendent's Association, it would be important for me in the future to say, what are the things that we need to have happen in the future? And what could we do for build construction early so that we could plot ourselves appropriately into more predictable? But from my perspective, we've been in a reactive and unplanned arena in education funding for a long time. And when you're dealing with children, that's very, very difficult to sustain programming, right? And similar to what you just talked about on the weighting study, that has implications where there may need to now be significant reductions to cover that increased cost, right? For us down the road, which may impact certain programming that's really important. You talked about pre-K and childcare, absolutely critically important. Foundation, just like the conditions of our schools and the statewide funding for school construction or the ability to you know, address and fix them. We don't have anything. There's $23 million, a lot of money, but we're talking significant amount of money. We got a Burlington High School, one of 400 schools, the first one to do anything, had to shut down. The risk and liability right now in education is high. The likelihood that schools will have to shut down as we move forward to the PCB testing is probably high. Is it 1%, maybe one more school or 2 or 4? I don't know, but I'm really, really worried about that. And I think that there needs to be a really immediate, thoughtful conversation to how to endure that. And you're right, childcare and pre-K, that is the very foundation of the start of our experiences. We know that if we do that right, then children come into our systems, parents are supportive and guardians, and we have a much more regulated and planned outcome versus unplanned, how we have to put additional support people in front of our students who are having some struggles or trauma. So,
well, in our technical education, our state university systems are all untire. And then I don't know what you think of the Supreme Court decision in Maine, but it indicated that private schools are eligible also for public funding.
yeah, religious schools, it just passed, right? I mean, I think that one of the things that you mentioned, again, here are opportunities for us all in our community to think about. But currently we have struggles in, you know, pre-K to 12 education. We've got enrollment and issues in higher ed, certainly CCB and some of our state colleges. And we have businesses that are looking for qualified people that you talked about. There should be an opportunity, and South Burlington could model this where we look at connecting those silos more appropriately, right? How can we work with CCB and the state colleges? How can we work more connected with businesses? We do. We have some successes there for South Burlington at the hospital with internship programs that we work hard to get, but they're hard to hang on to. Why? Because you got to have staffing to help make those things happen. And it's not really sustainable from the funding model that's currently in place. So again, I don't want to ramble anymore, but
just want to put a plug in for high schoolers to serve on our board. We put that.
Yeah, so the climate action,
Yes.
Matt Dransfield, we've got, they're eager and excited to join in to your climate action committee. So our high school and middle school students are excited to do that. I think as you move forward, those contacts, Matt Dransfield at the high school, Pat Burke, Dave Hyatt, and Scott Sibo, who will be coming on board as a principal, are excited to make those connections for our kids. Relevant learning opportunities, which, I highly support.
Very good. So do we. Very good. And it is a segue. We're going to move on to the next agenda item. I really hope that we can all just thank you. I don't know if applause is appropriate at a meeting, but I certainly think it is. So I am just going to thank you. Just, it's amazing to think that there 34 years plus 36 years of service in our State House sitting here in this meeting. That is tremendous. Am I counting correctly?
30, 10.
40. Oh, I missed a decade. 40. That's the sign of my age, not yours, my age. Excuse
We
me.
get a fifth member in the House.
Yes.
In South Burlington, so we actually will have more voices to serve our community.
Yeah, very good.
A lot of training. Look forward to that meeting whenever, after the November election.
So a big thank you.
All right.
Leaving big shoes to fill. All right. Now to the update on the climate action plan and the request for South Burlington School District participation. And Helen, you were going to be, Helen Reilly, our council chair, will be.
Yeah, but I'm not presenting this. I'm hoping that,
Goldman is in the room.
oh, good, because I can't tell. So I'm going to tee it up to Ethan, and he has a short presentation, and we're looking for, some input back from the school board about what you are doing and what you think you could do, and comments on some of the things that we feel as a whole community might be items that the school can participate in and help us meet our goals of reducing CO2 and improving with climate. So Ethan, you have a slide deck or something, right?
Thanks, Helen. Actually, I'd just like to speak in presentation rather than put up a bunch of slides today. There's going to be an opportunity when we put out the full plan. You'll get pages and pages with graphics and numbers and all sorts of things to entertain you. But tonight I just wanted to sort of open the conversation and maybe have some time for some dialogue. So I guess I just want to open by, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the threat of climate change. I've thought about it a lot over 20 plus years of career in sustainability, but really the opportunity to think about how can we rebuild our communities and take advantage of the creativity going in here and all the amazing technology and resources that can really create a solution that will work for generations for us and around the world. And so this is really, the start of that conversation. The task force, the Climate Action Task Force, was convened last year by the council following resolutions in 2017 and 2014. And this was really the start of the decision to let's make a concrete plan, right? Let's actually figure out what are the steps we're going to take to move forward with this. So convened this task force with 7 committee members and Chair Reilly sitting on it and Paul Connor representing the staff, and bringing in the CCRPC, the Regional Planning Commission, to be the consultant to really do the work on crafting the plan. So that's what we've been working on for the last several months. We are sort of wrapping up the draft of the information and recommendations that we've been preparing, and getting ready to deliver that in September back to the council. And really at this phase, we're starting on this community outreach sort of listening tour, and have a bunch of plans of where are we going to go this summer to go and talk to folks throughout the community and lots of different organizations. And so this is sort of at the beginning of that process to go and get some feedback from you all. Really, we want to understand what people's interests are around climate change, what their concerns are, and what opportunities there might be to partner on, building these solutions together. So I'll just give you the sort of high level of some of the things we've been talking about, just to sort of set the stage for what sort of challenges we're looking at in the context for these solutions. So that the goal that we have set forward, it's a science-based goal based on recommendations from some other folks we've been working with, are to reduce CO2 emissions, greenhouse emissions, by 50% in the year 2030, and then to basically eliminate them by the year 2050. So really focusing on the 2030 goal because it's much more concrete. 2050 sounds like someone else's problem, right? 2030 is just around the corner, and 50% is it's not something we can wait to start on. So the good news is that the electricity supply that we have from Green Mountain Power is effectively carbon neutral. So really the places that we're looking at for the current emissions that we see in town and where we can reduce are transportation is about 2/3 of emissions. Buildings and thermal is the other third. So that's the broad brush what we have to look at there. And so we've, again, while we've got, lists and lists of things into agriculture and solid waste and land use and all sorts of stuff, that's really the primary focus of what we're recommending. And so I'll give you some of the sort of highlight recommendations that we've put together, include things like moving toward electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electrics. About 37.5% should be EVs, and the same percentage should be plug-in hybrids by 2030. And then reducing vehicle miles traveled by 2.5% a year. This is sort of modeling we've been doing. So again, just to give you a sense of the scale, right? And 2.5% doesn't sound large, but every year, more and more, right? We need to shift off of personal vehicles. And then in the building sector, right, we need to electrify about 8% of our commercial buildings by square footage every year in order to reach that goal. And so some of the strategies include like a 2030 district, which is a benchmarking protocol to sort of create a competitive atmosphere and expose where the sort of best opportunities are for improving commercial buildings. So that's a national program that Burlington and other Vermont cities participate in that we could join. And then some other strategies include an ordinance to prohibit fossil fuel use in new construction buildings, and then creating some kind of mechanism to regulate fossil fuel use in existing buildings, which would require a charter change. So that's a larger lift, certainly for the council to have to take on. And talking about things like net zero new construction policies. So some of these that I specifically am highlighting because some of these particularly, I think, touch on areas that overlap with the school's interests and responsibilities. And so hopefully that can feed some of this conversation. So I want to sort of frame up the conversation around the school in a couple ways, right? So when we're thinking about the different parts of the community that we can work with, we think about the school and the task force in a few different ways. So one, it is one more part of our community that's emitting CO2 and having direct in buildings and vehicles and people and actions, right? So that's one way, right? We've got to work with everyone in all the different sectors, and you are in that category, but also in a couple other ways, right? So as an educator of next generation, it's super important to make sure that the students coming out of schools are equipped to be part of the solution, right? It's going to be a generational problem, and they're all going to be involved in it. And then, thirdly, as a real community hub, right? As a convener of people throughout the community, and as a leader to showcase strategies and to lead by example and communicate with all different sectors of the community. So we think that's super important. So to open up the conversation tonight, really just wanted to open this up with a discussion about, like, here's the size of the challenge we're looking at. Here is the urgency and the schedule that we're looking at, and listen to some of your concerns about climate change and about some of the strategies that I've described and the effort it's going to take to get there, and then also to ask for ideas and ways that maybe we could work together and partner on solutions, and how we can find the best opportunities to use the strengths that the school has to help be part of the solution. So with that, I'll open it up for questions or thoughts or.
Official board, it's a broad general question, because it sounds like this is a very local, kind of startup organization. I'm curious if as a part of your longer plan, you see partnerships beyond the local community, right? To the extent that climate doesn't end on the borders of Vermont or South Burlington, what kind of relationships do you think of building beyond those actual physical?
So let me answer that in two ways. So tonight I'm here with the hat of chair of the task force, which has been convened for basically a year or two to produce this plan together with the Regional Planning Commission. So there's an open question in terms of this entity as an agent of local government, and whether it will then turn into some kind of an implementation task force to continue working on the climate action plan I will say, the way I heard that question sort of me in my other hat, which is as the founder of a community climate tech startup, because I'm offering a pilot to the South Burlington community to help track these carbon emissions. And so as CTO of Powered City, we are working with communities all around New England, but conversation tomorrow with a group in Missouri, working with folks all over the country. So absolutely, from that hat, yes, the solutions that we're looking at are going to be shared and replicated, and a lot of what that pilot, that will happen in parallel with this, will result in, like, that will then be brought to other communities. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities to sort of connect the work we're doing here in South Burlington with this sort of whole consortium, and that's always been important for communities to be able to, like, share techniques, and you don't have time to try everything, right? You've got to go and share tricks with other folks.
Oh, thank you.
Paul Connor, Planning and Zoning Director. I agree with everything that Ethan said, and I would also note that the starting point for the task force was to look at and build from the state's climate action plan. And so what is being considered at a statewide level and being shared with municipalities across the board, and then the challenge for us is what are the areas that the community has direct influence over here as the sort of sub work here of either a regulator, an investor, or an influencer, or a lobbyist, I guess, to our at least to the state level, and not to necessarily focus on federal car emission standards, because that's maybe a little bit too far up the line to have a significant impact on. But there's a lot of areas where we do at the local level, and tying it to what is being done at the statewide level, so it's not sort of ships passing in the night on a really important subject.
It's really helpful to see the connections.
Michael.
Yeah, I'd just like to pick up on another thing that you asked about, which is, are we working with other communities around us? My hope is that what we do will be infectious, like COVID.
But in a good way.
Everybody will catch it. And as an example, Burlington has passed an ordinance to prohibit the use of fossil fuels in new construction. And we've learned from them how that works and what we have to do. And that's a best example. There will be others of learning from other communities what they're doing, and we hope that the communities around will learn from what we plan to do. So yes, we are working with our surrounding communities.
South Burlington, in fact, has a revolving loan fund used for municipal investment that is being modeled by some other communities. There's been a lot of interest from some other energy committees around the state, and so we've helped support the Planning Commission, Regional Planning Commission, with some information, based on our experience.
How can we get parents to let their children, I know we've had difficulties with school bus drivers and shortage. How can we get parents to let their children ride the bus?
Well, there's a huge, obviously it makes sense that that could happen, and we could reduce then the number of buses that are in route. That's also coupled with safe and secure walks to school, and current conditions that are in play in and around our environments as a city, closely connected to Burlington, et cetera. So it's generally, when we get into traffic mitigation and crossing, those things start to enter in. As you can imagine, a young kindergartner or first grader walking to school, those become in play with making decisions on whether that's a appropriate or safe place to walk when traffic and people aren't always. It's very difficult right now. We have probably at least 10 to 15 infractions of people going through the bus every day, right? And so we don't do opposite side crossings, so we have to elongate our routes to do same side pickups or drop-offs because of that. Even though we have a police car sometimes behind them and issuing tickets, it still occurs. So I would say on a going forward basis, we have had for the last 15 years a very active group of students and advisors around our green teams and our energy conservation teams. They've been instrumental in the development of our solar array here. We're going to be the first, I think, in the state of Vermont to bring on 4 new electric powered school buses. We just got one in, I think, this past week. And people are looking at us like, how can we also do that? We did get the charging station in from Green Mountain Power to do that. And again, students are celebrating that. We've made some heating upgrades and control upgrades. Of course, our older buildings, which we talked about earlier, can only be so efficient. But that's also been wrapped into the past capital campaign discussion. And we had, I think, your committee that was part of that up through those years, looking at the conditions and how we can build to either LEED Gold or some LEED standard. We've done some work, obviously, every work that we've done at the Chamberlain noise mitigation we did, and we put in, heat pumps, high efficient heat pumps, which were paid for by the federal government for the noise piece. So we've done some of that work. Green Mountain Power and Vermont Gas have been kind of our collaborators, but I would say that one of the most important things we could do is marry you folks up with our green team groups, which is pretty large, and to work collaboratively, city, school-wide. And for us, we do have it embedded in our curriculum to make sure kids are learning about, carbon neutrality, efficiencies and things of that nature to try to help mitigate some of these things. So I could go on. We've done an array of things, no connection to solar, but I think it's awesome that what you guys are doing and what we've done as a city, but we have a long way still to go. Even as I think about the buses, it's like we've converted most of the old ones now to new technology and carbon emission more efficient, or whatever it's called. But we still have a long ways to go, as we'd like to get all of them off the fossil fuel.
Good. Kate Bailey has a question. School board director.
Thanks. Hi, Ethan. Nice to see you. Thanks for being here with us. I just wanted to ask from the school board's perspective, I'm hearing transportation and buildings and infrastructure are important pieces. So for us as a school board to hold, to make sure we're hitting these measures and benchmarks and monitoring this progress, is it just as simple as asking the question that, are we considering the most environmental option when we are approving new school buses and building infrastructure? Or are there other questions we should be asking as a school board in terms of that progress and measure?
Well, I guess I'd answer that in 2 ways. So certainly looking at, transportation and buildings and focusing on spending the most time there is the sort of easy answer of, when you have a decision in front of you and you're about to spend money, it's much easier to spend it on something that improves the situation rather than trying to fix it after the fact and you've already spent the money. But I think that the decision from the city's perspective to create this climate action plan was a step forward from similar strategies from what you're describing in the past, which was, when we have a decision in front of us, let's think about, could we do it a little bit better, right? And basically the conclusion that we've come to with the climate action plan is that we can't just make good decisions organically as they come up and hope to meet this kind of aggressive goal. We actually need to take a step back, look at the whole picture. Where are our emissions coming from and where are the opportunities? And then proactively figure out, what are the investments we need to make? Do we need to bring in more funding? Are there cost-effective things that we could get financed ahead of time? Are there things that we need to be thinking sort of across the spectrum, right? So some of the things when we talk about transportation for school, well, that's also connected to, where are the new houses going up and what are the transportation options from those houses, right? If you get into the plan, we actually couple transportation and land use together because they're so tightly connected. And so there's a lot of discussion about, trying to focus the emphasis on new construction in the transit zones and, bike ped infrastructure in the transit zone, and really trying to create those kind of dense development patterns that allow safe bike to and walk to school. And you can't do that in an individual decision, right? No individual decision shows that pattern. That's really stepping back and going, why do we have the emissions we have now? What would need to change? Okay, where's that system? Where's that coming from the system? Where do we need to start thinking about how to create that change over the next 20 years, 30 years? So that's what I guess I would recommend from the school perspective, as well, as to step back and think about where are the emissions coming from? What are the opportunities to change that? And then what do we need to start doing on a long-term basis to set ourselves up for making those kind of decisions? And it will include a lot of the small things that you're talking about, some of which are not small. Electric buses, I know, are not cheap. But I think it goes beyond those individual better choices.
I think of farm to school, that truly transformed, I think, your whole approach to delivering food to the students. And it turned into a way to educate students about where food comes from and what kind of food do we need in order to be healthy and to enjoy eating and to enjoy cooking and preparing and serving and bringing home recipes to the family. And I mean, it was truly a cultural change that farm to school brought, as I saw between when my sons, who are 21 and 23, and now my daughter, who's 11, a huge cultural shift in the schools. And that's what I think we're going to have to do here. It's a true cultural shift. Yeah.
I think it's kind of interesting, the conversation. I mean, of course, Jesse and I, we put the agenda together along with Helen and Dr. Childs. But I think there's a neat connection here, right? I mean, we talked about impact fees and we talked about schools, and we're talking about kind of the future. And currently our schools are okay, but they're in need of some pretty significant review, if you will, or upgrade. Here again is the opportunity, similar to what we did at the high schools when we went through that conversation to whether renovate or new build. A lot of those conversations became in play when we started to say, over time, when we put all those factors in, over time, they mitigate themselves and pay for themselves because it can be more net neutral, right? And so I think that, along with transportation and safe routes to schools, and can we put schools in places where we aren't crossing over major intersections, or putting them in places that have those kind of difficulties as we look to the future, probably more than 30 years too. But it's kind of a neat, an important connection, and certainly educating our youth who are going to be leading, our country, how we do that. And I think a lot of them are very cognizant, to your point. They know that what I'm eating today comes local. And when it comes local means that it didn't have to travel very far, which means it didn't need to burn the energy that it needed to get here. And so a lot of our kids are very, very astute to that. And I think we want to continue to perpetuate that on a larger scale. So, I mean, I think it's just a really nice and important connection for us to hear tonight.
And it doesn't come out of a plastic container that you peel off and throw away. It's actually someone with their hands who are washing and chopping, and it's a wonderful thing. Yeah, Michael.
Yes, this is not necessarily climate action, but it's education. Children are terrified of what's coming to them and what we're leaving them. And I think the schools need to have a very, very much expanded and intense curriculum to prepare these children for the sacrifices and the changes in their lives that they're going to have to make and live with to keep our planet habitable. They're going to be significant. But I think if there's a strong curriculum to teach them how to cope with what's coming, we might be able to alleviate some of that pain and terror and fear that they all feel. I mean, it is really, really a serious issue for children today. I can't emphasize it enough. I'm not a parent of a child at school, but I have grandchildren at school. And they are afraid. And I've spoken to other parents in South Burlington. Their children are afraid. So afraid that they say, we're not going to have children. We can't bring children into the kind of world that's coming down the pike. That is really sad. And I think the school curriculum can do something to help and alleviate some of that.
I went back to our city council meeting on Monday. I went back to, I remember my earliest, kind of social studies class, what human beings need, right? Food, shelter, water, and where we live, clothing, right? That's my earliest memory of my social studies, and it's truly those basics that we're gonna have to cover in the years to come. Other questions for Ethan? Very good.
Just on-
Yeah, Michael.
On vehicle miles traveled, we talked about electric school buses and so on, but school buses, a lot of students don't use the school bus. It's there, but they don't use it. Those who can afford drive their own cars to school. And that is a big chunk of, I don't know how many school days there are in a year. What?
180.
180.
Student days.
So, and times the number of kids who drive to school, that is a big chunk of vehicle miles traveled, and it's something that maybe you and your colleagues can think about. How can you expand the use of school bus service, which we're paying for anyway, and reduce the vehicle miles traveled in that way? I think it's also an equity issue, because there are a lot of kids who must use the school bus because they can't afford a car. So it would kind of level the playing field a bit if we could get more kids to use the bus rather than drive to school in their own car.
I'm carpooling it out. Oh, go
So-
ahead.
But one of the issues are we can't force these parents that their kids must get on the bus. That's not our job. So it's hard to say, well, what we should be doing, but we cannot do that. So
What
we
I'm-
need to figure,
Go ahead, go ahead.
I mean, we need to figure out some type of way, but telling a parent, said, you told me, well, your kid doesn't need to drive. That's not your business. Because people would be offended, then they'll be calling us at the school board saying, well, why can't our kids drive their cars? It's always going to be something, but we need to figure out how we can work together to find the solution.
That is exactly what I've said. We're not talking about forcing anybody to do anything. I don't know where that idea came from. I said encourage.
Well, what I can say, it's my favorite UVM story. They simply made me move my parking space to the other side of campus, and I'm like, you got me on the bus. It drops me off right in front of my building. So there is something to say about parking management that can
I
really
There
incentivize.
are lots of tools.
I absolutely, I think we have a lot of tools that we need to talk about, I think, from educating to looking at like CCTA, right? How we could maybe take buses off. I mean, how could we they don't go everywhere, right? And so could that be expanded? Safe routes to schools, how could we have, kind of more partnership with city to help walking school buses, right? Volunteers that are vetted and safe to be around kids. I mean, many different ways. And we've worked hard with that, with safe routes to schools, but there are some limitations to that. And I think this is absolutely a concerted effort. And many of our kids, as you say, they're scared. And many of those scared kids said, they're not going to drive. And some of them don't want to come to school either, then because of that, right? Some of them are not feeling comfortable. Obviously, most of this is connected to COVID stuff, but many of them have not wanted to come back to school. There's a lot of fear, and I think you're right around many ways, right? Whether it's our current conditions in our society with COVID, or whether there's other pieces that are connected. And we want them to be able to love to come to school, love to learn, and love to take advantage of the things that we have to offer. But I think about transportation, and we've worked hard to get some buses, like CCTA buses in certain areas, for our kids to participate in an internship program. Difficult, right? Difficult. So I think, again, there's a societal conversation that needs to happen around how can we circle up together to make sure that we're being good stewards to the future, well beyond, the 30, 40, 50 years, so.
It seems it would be helpful to do a study of a sort, right? To dive into and truly understand what the motivating factors are. So for example, I would guess at some point in a kid's life when they're old enough to drive. Because I see this play out in my own life. I have 2 kids, one just graduated, one's a sophomore, rising junior, who will get her license in October. Time is a factor, right? She spends maybe an hour a day on the bus. If she can cut that time down, she gets more time back into her day. So if that is, one example, well, what is our response to that? Is there a way we can structure and have kids maybe group up at certain points so that you can reduce the transit time, right? But we can't really address them, I don't think, until we understand what the largest pain points are. Because if we can relieve some of those, then we might be able to create more incentive to get folks on the bus.
Gas at $15 a gallon will force more parents to put their kids on the bus.
Exactly. Yeah, and I learned to do all kinds of things in the bus. I do my emails in the bus, I read books, I actually grade papers. It's a working office when I sit down.
Not all buses have Wi-Fi.
Yeah, with a bus full of kids though.
No, it's not.
That's well, you
Long
think about
buses.
how the bus is configured, right? You can
Island
think about
buses
it.
in Georgia have Wi-Fi, and kids do take advantage of that. But I think, again, Dr. Boyer's right. The differences in schedules, right, predicate sometimes the riders. So in many cases, in order to load the bus, we want to increase the routes, which increase the times. So that deters them some to ride because of other obligations, so it gets
Can't
complicated.
get home
Again,
in time to get to my next thing if I take the bus.
that's right. And I think when you start to overlay like the city of South Burlington and the routes, you got a CCTA bus going, and then you've got school buses going, and then cars going, and a lot of them going to the same places many times. So again, I do think there's a opportunity to be more efficient, but you got to be careful to make the change and see it adversely affect.
And incentivize that. Emily, yes, please.
Yeah, I don't need to remind folks here because I know you're all very thoughtful of it, but just when you do messaging, and remember that some people can't take the bus due to accessibility concerns or other disabilities. Both my nephews, they don't live in Vermont, but cannot take the bus to school. And so it's just important to remember that while we push for some things, it's not accessible for everyone, just in messaging and inclusion as well. Thank you.
Well, we have buses with lifts, but the point being is that not all buses have lifts, and not all students or children are able to ride on a bus that has multiple numbers of students for a variety of, could be disability reasons, et cetera.
Right, and not just physical disabilities as well. Thank you.
Are there other questions, or should we move on to other business? No questions? Well, I'm sure this is going to be an ongoing conversation. I really thank you, Ethan, for coming in and giving us your time on a Wednesday evening. As for another business point, if I don't see any hands raised, I think this is the moment where we really thank David for his many years of service.
Well, thank you all.
And,
Yeah.
wish you well. We know that we got probably, I'm gonna say it, even though it's a public meeting, the best out of you. And so we're just very grateful for what you gave. And as I truly believe, a superintendent is like a police chief. You are one of the pillars of the community. So
Well, it's been a real pleasure to serve this South Burlington as a superintendent, and I am a community member still, right around the corner. Want to stay actively engaged and involved in a lot of the things that you're dealing with right now. So looking forward to it.
we need everybody to go back to the bus discussion. Yeah. But thank you, David. Truly, I have 3 children that all were very much in your care for many years. So I
A lot of
appreciate
a lot of great students that have moved on and coming back to us too, which is really nice.
All right. Very good meeting. It was a full meeting, but boy, now we gotta spring into action, right?
I move to adjourn.
Thank you. Is there a second?
moved.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all.